computer. All right. Hi, Dinesh. Good to see you again.
Yo,
I'll just ramble for a bit to provide context. So
sounds
this is
good.
the third chat that me and Dinesh are having on this channel. We did one discussing mental models and how to win in whatever games you define, about your edge and competencies and stuff like that. The other one was about frames and how, I'm guessing, how to think about how you're thinking. So I mean, actually, so we've known each other a long time. I used to work for Dinesh in the previous life. And for as long as I've known you, you've always been interested in, thinking clearly, knowing what's going on, paying attention to things, managing your attention well. And actually, I remember in the earliest days, um, I was curious slash confused slash so I mean, so I remember that you had much stronger opinions slash feelings slash belief about the importance of filtering,
Mhm.
being judicious about the filters of information that you receive. And I was not convinced initially. I was like, well, shouldn't you take in everything? And I have since come around quite a bit along that. And I think that's in line with what we want to discuss today. So today we want to discuss like attention. So one phrase I've used is attention sovereignty, and the idea being that attention sovereignty is probably the root of all other sovereignty, because if you can't control what you pay attention to, and then you can't control your anything else potentially. And I think we are both approaching this from similar interests in terms of so we've tried to think clearly for ourselves, and we have kids. We want our kids to think clearly for themselves, and not get your attention hijacked by whether malicious actors or even just random noise or whatever's going on in the world. We recognize that things are crazy in the world, and they're only going to get crazier for a whole bunch of reasons. And we have friends, and we care about people, and we want to help people manage their attention well in a way that is good for themselves, good for their lives, and this cascades all the way to good for democracy, good for nations, good for everybody. Yeah, so I think a good way to begin this kind of thing, that topic can be so big potentially, is like concrete everyday problems. And I think we both have a lot of experience like having conversations with people who seem to be struggling. And so I remember our conversations and how long it took you to get me to see a bunch of these things. And even now, when my understanding of it is partial, and I think part of the point is that the understanding is always partial, always vague to a degree you don't realize. Um, but yeah, my hope for this conversation is that we can discuss something that will be of use to the next person that we have some form of this conversation with, right? So yeah, all of that preamble aside, is just how do we help people who seem to be struggling with how they manage their attention?
Yeah, so I think this kind of naturally follows from the previous chat we had about mental models. And I mean, just like what you said, that's huge. Mental models or epistemology is hugely important. Epistemology in the sense of how do you know what you know, making knowledge, that's hugely important, whether it's an individual who you're trying to help get unmuddled, or a community around them, or a team trying to achieve an objective, even as broad as an electorate, right? Who you vote for matters a lot, especially with all the shenanigans happening now. And so it feels like a large part of understanding mental models is how they fail, right? So concrete examples is, what is very common these days is just going on social media and misunderstanding something that's being said. And what's actually happening there is you're kind of auto-completing the gaps wrongly, right? So we've talked before, and I think we have written stuff about how it's a very lossy medium, right? Social media, Twitter, any of these mediums, where you're trying to really squeeze your whole mind space, or what you're trying to convey into a set of really clunky, platonic, discrete words, and then you're sending that through some medium. Somebody else is receiving those clunky, platonic words and trying to recreate your mental state. And that is going to leave a lot of gaps. If you auto-complete those gaps wrongly, what's going to happen is you are going to get in trouble. That at scale is quite frightening, and you see some of the effects of that. And really, all of this is down to what I've spoken a little bit. System one, Daniel Kahneman talks about system one, system two, and the different ways that can fail. But it feels like the precursor for talking about mental models or model failure is what you mentioned, which is kind of the nature of attention, right? And specifically, what you said was, we've talked about this before, but it took you quite a long time to get around to it. The reason for that might be just that we didn't have good enough or legible enough ways to convey that information. Just like what we said, when I was trying to convince you of that, or in our conversations, again, we had to use clunky Platonic forms to kind of convey that, try to recreate that understanding in your mind. And right, I think there's value in making these things legible. That's part of the reason why I'm writing some of this stuff. When I convey it to my team or other people, right, you want to make it easy for them to get up to speed. And so making some of these terms or these ideas legible has value, it feels like. And so what I was saying is that the precursor to talking about attention or model failure is really specifically kind of the attention negative space, right? So what does that mean? So you have what you're focusing on, and that's on focus, and there's all that stuff around you that you aren't focusing on. Let's just call it your off focus. So when you read something or you have a conversation with someone, right, they are throwing words at you, and those words are leading you down a very specific path. They're recreating some understanding, or they're sparking thoughts in your brain and leading you down a very specific path. And it's like, you can think of it as you're walking along a path and you're looking down at the path, right? And you're following this path, you're walking along the path, and you don't understand that, hey, wait a minute, there's something off the path that I'm walking. And and at an extreme example, it can be a bridge, right? So you're crossing a valley on a bridge, and you're only looking down at the bridge. And if you don't realize that, hey, there's something outside of this path that I'm walking on that can potentially be dangerous. And so you want to be aware that as you're going along this path of focus, there's an off focus. Now, does that kind of make sense? So the tricky thing about that is the expectation is just to make this concept legible. The fact that when you are focusing on something, you're on focus, there is a complementary off focus. It's not necessarily to know what's in your off focus, because having on focus and off focus is natural, right? This is a characteristic of the fact that we have limitations in perception and things like that. So the goal is not to know what exactly is in your off focus, because then it becomes your on focus. The key really is to know that it's there, right? And this, and again, I'm just trying to test these things out to see how to convey them, right? This awareness is hard because there's that David Foster Wallace piece about this is water. Well, the fish saying, hey, what the hell is water? So the tricky thing is, when you're paying attention to something, again, you're on this path and you're looking down at the path. If you don't have a term for describing your off focus or the off path, it might not even enter your any kind of lens. And the thing I'm trying to figure out is, how do you make people internalize that there's an on focus and an off focus? Because if you get that understanding in some kind of background way, things like model failure become very obvious. It's very obvious that you are going to have bugs when you autocomplete, because your auto-completing is based on your own focus, right? And what you've been focused on before. If you realize that, hey, there's a whole bunch of things that are not within my attention, are in my attention negative space, you naturally, the hope, I don't know, this might be just unique to me, but the hope is you automatically internalize the fact that, hey, wait a minute, when I'm filling in these gaps, when I'm auto-completing what this person is saying, there might be bugs. And so you automatically account for model failure, because in the back of your mind that there is an off focus. Not that you're trying to understand what's in your off focus. The fact that it's there, the hope is that will help you approach these things in a more optimal way. And you can just kind of apply this onto itself. So I'm trying to figure out, what is my off focus when I am talking about off focus and it is my on focus? Does it make sense? Okay.
Well, yeah, I get
So
it.
we're talking about this conversation now, and I'm leading you down a path. I'm making
Right.
you look down at the path, and I've
Right.
introduced a term, off focus. But we are now focused on off focus. But we're focused on the specific things I'm telling you about off focus. But there is an off focus to our conversation about off focus. For example, maybe there's already literature about this, or maybe there are studies about this,
Oh
or
yeah.
maybe it's
Yeah.
already right.
Yeah.
And so the thing is, once you know that, you will automatically change the way you convey this to someone,
Mm.
how you want to validate it and things like that.
Right.
Maybe I'll stop there in case that's too
Yeah. Yeah. I think
abstract.
I think I get it. It is a bit abstract, but as you were saying those things, I was reminded of some of the best principles I've picked up in just having conversations with people in a lossy medium at high speeds and so on. And there are things that, it's funny because traditional writing advice, and again, that itself is like, what's the context? Why are they saying it for? Blah, 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 right? But like a common thing you hear people say is things like, don't hedge your words and don't,
Mhm,
which serves a particular purpose, right? If you want to
mhm,
be persuasive rhetorically and you're trying to slogan, if you're trying to write slogans, you want it to be bold so that it spreads and it's easy to read and so on. But I have found that by being it's funny because people will say I'm gonna say I have found it useful to hedge my words and say things like, it seems to me that, I get the impression that, so on. And um, I do that a lot, and I think it serves me well. I think it helps to explain part of why, like, I have the Twitter following size that I have, but not the corresponding equivalent kind of for brain rot slash
mhm.
chaotic bad faith replies and stuff like that. I think it's because I put in so much I sort of front load a lot of, look at what is going on, and this is my impression, this is my point of view, to prime the readers into at least trying to consider that. And people do say that, people do respond sometimes that that's not uh it's not a good idea, it's not helpful or whatever. And no, but that's not that important in this context.
Yeah, I guess
I
what I would bring up to what you just said is that so one is there are different types of writing which have
Mhm.
different purposes, but
Right.
general the writing and communication is
Mhm.
not an off-focus activity, right?
Right.
Writing and communication is a very on-focus activity. I am
Mhm.
trying to lead you down on a path.
Right.
I'm not expecting you to think about your off focus. That's the whole
Ye-
purpose of, I mean, in a lot of cases,
Yeah.
writing for a persuasive purpose. And
Yeah.
so you could make the case that that's why it's counterproductive to hedge your words and things like that. Because, and the thing is, right now we kind of have vocabulary to talk about it. That's kind of the whole point of making this legible.
Mhm.
I can tell you that, okay, is your writing meant for off focus or for on focus or off focus? And in a lot of cases, it's going to be to inject some ideas, maybe not assertively, but with confidence in a audience's mind to
Right.
achieve some purpose that the writer has.
Mm.
And I mean, in that context, off focus is a distraction. Off focus is an annoyance.
Right.
The key where that might be why this is so, I mean,
Challenging.
why it's not commonly discussed, because the the nature of communication and writing is not to talk about the off focus.
Mm.
Where understanding off focus becomes useful is for yourself, your own
Right.
epistemology,
Right.
when you are the receiver of information.
Right.
The senders of information maybe shouldn't is not the right word, but typically don't
Mhm. Yeah. So yeah.
account for the off focus.
Yeah, what I'm remembering now is, yeah, so if everyone had very healthy epistemology, we wouldn't need to hedge and caveat because every
Mhm.
receiver does it on the receiver's end. But
Yes.
knowing that people, so again, it depends on the context that you're operating in and the purpose of what you're trying to do. But yeah, I find it useful to, well, again, when I say I find it useful, again, I'm revealing that I'm talking about a particular context. And yeah, I think what you're saying makes sense. I think it's useful. And so I'm brought to the challenge of, like, how do we get people to consider this in relation to their own lives? And so we were talking also about, like, unmuddling people, right? So I think let's pause that thread for a while and talk about
Mhm.
unmuddling for a bit, and then maybe we go back. Right, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so the key to unmuddling really is that um stuff is getting injected into your attention, almost in a very passive, inadvertent way. And what happens is when your what is injected into your attention determines so much of your worldview. And again, right, this is the this is water piece, or even Morgan Housel talks about your understanding of the world is just based on this tiny, tiny slice of experiences that you've had.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing is, when you are not careful about what gets injected into your attention, it's easy to see how you'd be muddled. And that
Right.
gets much worse in modern media environments because you get stuff injected into you all the time. And the crazy part about this is the you know previously, when media was more kludgy, right? And no, kludgy is not the right word. Previously, when media was more discreet, right? You
Mm.
have, say, mainstream media or gate-kept media, or regulated media, sanctioned media, and you have unsanctioned media, right? And so unsanctioned media, it's very clear that that is okay. That is like stuff maybe I shouldn't listen to. It's something that is clearly not good for me, or it's off the beaten path. And sanctioned media is where I get my information from, and that's where I allow it to inject into my attention fully. What modern media does with intermediation, disintermediation, right, of publishers and gatekeeping and all this stuff, is that you now have a blurring of the lines between quote unquote sanction, the two buckets of media. And so what happens is you end up, it's much easier to inject something into your attention space, making you think that it's something you should be paying attention to.
Mm.
And it's much harder to realize that, hey, wait a minute, so this isn't sanctioned. And so how much should I allow into my attention? How skeptical should I be? And that becomes very tricky because, maybe you can use another example is currently financial instruments are also very sanctioned and unsanctioned, right?
Right.
There is your bank offering you an investment product that's regulated, it's very safe. Some rando coming to you up to the street and saying, hey, you want to buy some shares of this, is probably going to be really suspicious, and you're going to avoid that.
Mm.
So that's really discreet, right? It's very obvious what you should do. Say with, crypto or whatever, there are now that line is blurring. So you have very prominent figures shilling, say, random crypto tokens, right? Prominent tech figures, prominent, media figures shilling random crypto tokens, and that boundary has now blurred.
Right.
This, person I look up to, or person who's kind of regulated in a way, is telling me to buy this thing. And now unless you have a very strict understanding of, I should be really skeptical of this thing, it's much more likely that you'll buy into it or you'll invest in it. It's like if your bank told you this really suspicious crypto token is legit, you're much more likely to buy it because your bank is telling you, right? And so the thing is, the bank is now prominent social media figures, prominent figures in the media, because there's no longer a gatekeeper for creating an investment product, right? A meme coin is a quote unquote investment product. 30 years ago, there was no such thing. And so any random kind of meme coin that got you, the equivalent that got you is from a really suspicious channel. But now you have much more prominent channels pushing, say, investment products to you. And in the same way, you have to be much more careful about what you allow into your attention, because media is the same way. Skilled media practitioners can craft media in a way that makes it feel like what used to be a sanctioned, regulated media channel, to make you things, and it may not even be malicious. It's just that the volume of it can put you down a path that's very suboptimal quickly. Because the tricky thing about media, which is even worse than, say, investment products, is the fact that once you take in some media, your worldview is now shaped by that media. And so your starting point to evaluate new media itself changes.
Right.
And so it's really, it can get wild pretty quickly. And so that's kind of, back to your point about why I've always been guarded, and about how it's so easy to get muddled. in the modern media environment, I'm actually surprised anybody isn't unmuddled.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, so I guess everyone is everyone is muddled
Yep,
about things that they are not.
sure,
So everyone's
sure.
muddled to varying degrees, and the question it's like the tailored thing about want to live happily in a world I don't understand, right? So it's
Yep.
like here's
Mhm.
the domains in which I am happily muddled and it doesn't really matter, and then here are the domains in which it's important that I be as rigorous as possible about what I know and what I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, but saying that I want to live happily in a world that I don't understand itself is a very sophisticated stance because
right,
you are acknowledging that there are large parts of the world that you don't understand, that you're not trying to understand, that you
right,
don't need to understand to be
right,
happy.
right,
Whereas the modern media environment tells you you have to understand everything.
right,
You can understand everything.
right.
It's important to understand everything. And
Mm.
as a result, happiness goes out of the window. I mean, it's not happiness. I mean, that is also, it's that you become muddled when trying to achieve outcomes that make you happy.
Say that again. You become muddled
Yeah,
when trying to
you
achieve.
become muddled when you try to. So the
Why does
point
that?
of mental models is really to act in the world to become happy.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
And
Hmm.
when you're muddled, what happens is your models fail in a way that because you now have, you see, right, again, saying that I want to live happily in a world that I don't understand means you are foregoing a whole set of mental models. Because you're
Right,
saying that I don't understand the world, I don't need a model for many, many parts of the world.
right.
But saying that means that you are allowing to have a lot of blank space in your mental model kind of map.
That's
But
interesting.
modern media makes you
Mhm.
gives you a sense of urgency that you have to have an opinion about everything. You have to know everything. You have to fill up your mental model map.
Right.
And what
And
happens
yeah,
when you filled up your mental model map? It's much harder to actually get happiness. Here's an analogy. If you have a map, a regular map, right? And a lot of parts of it are torn, and you know it's torn, and it's fine. I'm not trying to fill in those parts. I'm just trying to get to the lake or the treasure or whatever. And there's this path in the map that I have that allows me to get it. Sure, it might not be the fastest route. It might not be the quickest route or whatever, but I know how to get there. And you're much more likely to get it than having this extensive full map super detailed, but
right,
all the parts of it are wrong. So you think that you're supposed to go to there's a shortcut here. You take it, you fail. Okay, then you get confused. Then yes, you start getting muddled. Then you listen to somebody else, you fill in some other part of it, or you replace it with something else, and then you take another path, and then that's wrong. And the tricky thing is this: all of this works to break your psychology.
right.
Right. It makes you, we talked about managing psychology before, and this makes it harder to manage your psychology because saying that I want to live happily in a world I don't understand. It's very clean psychologically.
Hmm.
There's a ton of stuff I don't know. I need to know a few things.
Mhm.
And I can tell myself stories about the things I don't know, and that's fine because they don't matter.
Right.
But when media tells you that everything matters, you have to have an opinion about everything, not because it's a story to tell yourself to keep yourself happy, but because it's important and it's knowable,
Right.
you end up forming opinions about many things that uh, make it harder to follow the path to get to, the treasure.
Hmm. And yeah, and I'm as thinking of two separate things right now. There's a social component. There's a very strong social
Yep.
component to this,
Mhm.
right? Like which is that um, it always without context, it always seems in the abstract like a potentially good idea. If someone comes along and says, "Hey, this part of your map is vague, blurry, like, would you like to fill it in?" And if you're not rigorous in thinking, do I even trust this person? Do I even need that? Do I even trust this person? Is this worth spending my time? Whatever. It's very easy to be like, oh yeah, sure. Like, tell me what I don't know, right? That was the whole premise of like clickbait content, which was like, you won't believe this thing that you don't know, right? And people have that curiosity gap, which is very exploitable. So it's like a backdoor into people's minds,
Yeah, but
basically.
but it's way more insidious than that because that happens, and then you see all your friends also have an opinion about it, not
Right,
just your peers, the
right,
people you look up to having an opinion
right.
about it.
The industry seems
Because
to care. Yeah.
exactly when everybody is, it's not even that they're muddled, it's that they're inadvertently muddled because they feel like they need to have an opinion about the latest war or the latest movement in the stock market or the latest
Right.
whatever. What happens is it becomes socially um, uh, approved, not even socially approved. It's almost there's social disapproval if you are like an opinion hermit
Right.
that doesn't want to have an opinion about something or isn't talking about the latest thing that came in your For You tab,
Right.
and you're just focused on your little thing, right?
Opinion hermit is a great phrase for something. Like it captures like the trade-off that, so for a lot of people, they would even, and everything I've written about this elsewhere, where people who are lonely and scared, like a bunch of very human emotions, right?
Mhm.
Um, they will trade understanding for, and like they to, and like in the board apes, they use phrases like apes together strong, or that kind of thing, right? Like that emotional resonance of, oh, I have other people around me who are all, let's all like blood pack let's all mutilate some part of our sense making
Mhm.
collectively so that we are strong, we have a bigger group, is a very strong thing for people to, there's even that old adage or something like the only sane person in an insane kingdom will be marked as the insane one to everyone else. And like people like that sounds like an extreme case, but in everyday life there's also versions of that. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean the thing is, right, and I've posted about headsets and how it's a good analogy to kind of
Right.
system one.
Yeah.
And so what happens is the media or the opinions that reach you
Mhm.
are the ones that are sticky for headsets.
Right.
And the thing that makes this, the thing that makes things really sticky for headsets is when other headsets are following it or other headsets are
Mhm.
sanctioning it, right?
Right.
Social proof is a massive part of getting stuff into your system one or what your system one picks up on. And it makes a ton of sense because typically what everybody followed in kind of an ancestral environment was absolutely the thing you should be doing, right?
Right.
But again, and we've talked about this, we're clearly not prepared for how media is changing because the volume of opinions you get exposed to,
Hmm.
and it might even be that in a long time ago, you also thought that, hey, I need to have an opinion about everything. Okay, that's fair. And that having opinions are important. So maybe a long time ago, they also didn't think that I want to live happily in a world that I don't understand. Maybe they also thought that I need to understand the world to be happy.
But the concept
The
of what the world
difference,
was so much smaller.
it's one, the concept of what the world was, but how quickly the volume of information comes at you to help you understand was way more limited. Again, like what we talked about before, right? So there was regulated media, which is the opinions that the way to understand the world. It's very clear. It's very discrete what channels I get information to understand the world. And the volume was way lower, right? Sure, maybe that's a newspaper, a town newspaper, or whatever. The thing is now the volume of information, the number of opinions that you can be exposed to when you have the thinking like I need to understand the world to be happy. There's so much to fill that in now, right? If I need to understand the world, there's so much information out there to understand the world by, and so it can get overwhelming.
Right. So I want to be like, if I were to represent the average person who comes into my DMs once a week or something, or someone that's working for you or something, and they ask, okay, I hear all of this, and it sounds like I'm misallocating my attention. What do I do? Like, what do you respond to that?
Okay. So there are a couple of things. One I would first, the key again, the precursor just feels like you need to make all these things legible. Okay. So one is understanding on focus and off focus.
Mhm.
Another thing I would add is, and we kind of had a tangential conversation, I think, on WhatsApp about this before, which is that okay, so when you are presented with a new mental model or opinion, right? You can you have different you can have different stances to it. One is unfiltered. There's no filter at all. You allow the mental model in, it changes your worldview, and you never get rid of the crud. So you never fix the mental model when you are presented with new things. And so that's one version of unmuddling. Okay. Another stance can be a blacklist. And so what happens? You allow everything in, when you are then presented with evidence or mental model that goes against your previous model, you blacklist, you remove some models from that. Does that make sense? Okay, so one is you allow everything in and you don't change your worldview when new information comes in.
Okay.
Another one
All right.
is
Yeah.
you allow everything in and you blacklist, you remove stuff to alter your worldview. So that's a common path.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, right, the problem is in the modern media environment, it feels like that can very quickly spiral out of control. Why? Because one, the deluge of opinions thrown at you means you're allowing a whole bunch of things in. And you must understand that a lot of these opinions or mental models can't be tested.
Right.
So you will never be able to, you will never practically remove them because there's just so much. And it's, it's a broken telephone, right? It's an opinion of somebody else's opinion, of some other opinion, or finally the person in reality who either came up with it or tested it. And by the time you work through that chain, I mean, it gets really messy.
And also, you know that the nature of producing opinions is such that the opinions that reach you the most are not likely to be the most well considered.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because again, like what you mentioned earlier, when you are writing, you want to be confident.
Right.
And the purpose of communication is to lead someone down an on-focus path. And so there's no reason to make them consider their off focus. And there's
Right.
no reason to make them think that, oh, okay, so this thing that I just took in, I should remove. Okay.
Right.
A third model, a third stance, which I need to kind of articulate this better and I'll figure it out, is to have a whitelist, which means you don't let any mental model in, or you let
Right.
very, very few mental models in based on some strict whitelist. And obviously, how strict it is up to you. But so what happens is you read a ton of stuff, you read all the stuff you originally read, but you are very deliberate about not allowing any of them to change your mental state until some set of things have happened. Either you've validated it or that person is very believable. Or so there's some criteria for allowing an opinion or mental model to change your worldview. So you can read it. And, again, I don't know how possible this is with the way system ones work, right? I mean, the way your system one works, your headsets work, is it suggests things to your brain without you even knowing it. So it might almost be that even by reading the thing, even if your system two or your brain is saying, okay, I'm not going to include this in my worldview, you've already included in your worldview because that's just how your brain works. But anyway, so leaving that aside, a safe stance, as much as it's doable, is to have a whitelist, meaning I read everything I normally would read on the internet or anywhere else, but there are very, very few opinions I allow into my system. And again, right, you're not making the judgment that this opinion is wrong. You are just making the judgment that I don't need to have an opinion here. Right? So again, it's going to default to people thinking that you're not listening to someone because you think they're wrong, but it's not. It's much more nuanced than that. Is that your attention is sacrosanct, your mental space, your worldview is sacrosanct, and what you allow in is again, it's a whitelist. You're not saying what doesn't pass through the whitelist is bad. You're not. You have no opinion about it because if you think that, you are already allowing an opinion into your whitelist.
Say that again.
Okay, so if you read something and it doesn't pass into your whitelist and you have formed opinion that it's bad, you have already allowed an opinion into your whitelist inadvertently.
Oh, okay, yeah, right.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah,
and so you want to have no opinion about it.
Right. Yeah. So I have learned about this in the domain of like approaching it from the Nietzschean kind of yes sayer thing, which is that so his quote was like, and I learned this in my own experience from arguing with people where even if like you're arguing with someone and you put in a lot of effort and trial and error to or whatever it takes to get to the correct position or whatever you think is the correct position on the argument, but you're already invested in that thing, right? Which is not necessarily what you wanted to be doing. And that's the most innocuous like version of the thing I can describe. There's so much worse things where once you're weighted in, any position you take relative to that is defined in relation to the thing.
Exactly. So
Huh.
that's the real insidious thing about, again, not guarding your attention, not being aware of your on focus and off focus, because it's so dangerous, right? How these things can incept you or creep into you that, again, so the whitelist, I'll figure out a more concrete way of how to
Right.
articulate that. But that is the stance I would recommend in a modern media environment, to
Mhm.
have a whitelist for opinions.
Right.
You
Okay. Yeah.
only
Yeah.
allow, yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
it's interesting. So as you're saying all of this, and even from a while ago, I was starting to piece together in my mind, like, okay, like we're talking about like kind of abstract things about attention and focus. And I think we have a shared understanding of why we are having
Mhm.
this conversation. But someone who's just passing in might be like, why are these guys talking about this? And again, because we both have that shared understanding. But I think how I would try and explain it to someone else is like to zoom out and see the big picture. It's like we have really been living, I think probably since I don't know how many decades, maybe since the 90s, maybe earlier, but we've been living in information peace, if that makes sense. Sort of like
Mhm.
compared, like we're entering this information chaos era of and it's interesting to juxtapose that in the broader sense with like even if we all lived through COVID, and like you don't need things like safe distancing measures when there isn't a pandemic going on, right? Like when
Mhm.
like and when there's a pandemic going on, like okay, like I don't know, whether or not you're sick. I don't know how this virus is going to spread, but like safety measures are, keep a distance, wear a mask, whatever. And it feels like there's some version of this that we're anticipating. So like, and we literally use the phrase hygiene for thinking about this, right? Like so there may have been contexts in which epistemic hygiene or like information hygiene wouldn't have cost you that badly in the past, but now it seems like all of those variables it's going to ramp up a lot. And
Yeah, and the real sneaky thing is, unlike a pandemic, which is a very binary thing, you
right,
immediately know when there's a pandemic
people are
because it
falling
has
sick.
very
Yeah,
visceral, visible manifestations.
my wife was actually
This
saying,
is
yeah,
this is a boiling the frog,
right,
case.
right, right. Yeah. Like my wife was telling me like she could, because we live not that far from a hospital. And so you kind of every day you can hear how many ambulances go by. And you can kind of
Mhm.
tell like almost as a leading indicator of like the case numbers when there was the second wave and third waves and stuff, you could tell from the ambulances. Whereas in the boiling the frog situation, like everything just gets vaguely shittier and you don't really know why. Like people just trust each other less, people are just more angry and frustrated, and it's just yeah.
Yeah, and again, right, the crazy thing about this is the reason why epistemology is so important is because your epistemology is the framework for understanding the world. So
Yeah.
your epistemology is how you understand pandemics.
Right. Yeah.
But pandemics have no way to sully your epistemology.
Right.
But the thing that you just described,
Hmm.
that the boiling the frog, what is happening is how your epistemology gets sullied.
Mm.
So your framework for understanding what is happening is getting degraded.
Right.
The thing that is happening is degrading your framework for understanding what is happening.
Right.
Do you
Yeah.
get,
Yeah.
and that's like wild.
I remember reading about this from like George Orwell and some other writer. And like so in the past, this happened primarily during wartime. So during
Mhm.
wartime, there's a lot of effort put into propaganda, pamphlets and whatever. And people would misuse words deliberately to present incorrect or like like propaganda. So it's like to support the war efforts, we're gonna say this thing happened when it didn't. We're gonna say this thing is worse. And so the war is already bad to begin with. But what people didn't realize or were not seeing as and again because the tools by which they use to see, which would be reading, right? Like so when that gets contaminated, they can't see that it's being contaminated because you can't see. And
No,
yeah,
no, that's right. But the purpose of a war is not to contaminate your epistemology.
right,
Contaminating your epistemology is a side effect to make it winning the war faster. But the
right,
purpose of a war is to take over
sure,
land or to
yeah,
destroy
that's a
a
goal,
country or
yeah,
whatever. The purpose of what is happening, or maybe not purpose, but the direct consequence of what is happening is a degradation of your epistemology. So it's like there's a war, but the war isn't trying to take over your country. The
mm.
war is trying to mess with your mind.
Yeah, yeah,
And as they start winning the war, or as the war gets more, wild, it makes it harder for you to comprehend the war. Not
right,
because the war is, writing something in the newspaper to confuse the population. is because the nature of the war is about information.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
so the point of hoping to make this stuff legible is because once you make it legible, you can build tools to deal with it, right? It's just
Yeah.
like you had a tweet about resource constraints
Right.
and skilled practitioners or seasoned practitioners, they have a more sophisticated way of talking about resource constraints.
Right. I mean,
And
even at the beginning of this call, when I asked you how to start thinking about mental models, the first thing you said was like think about how it fails, right? Which is
yeah,
a
yeah,
practitioner's, you know how the engine
yeah,
works by knowing how it breaks down. Like
yeah,
that's the important stuff you need to know.
yeah.
Sorry, you're saying?
So yeah, in the same way, what we want to do is by making this legible to become a seasoned practitioner or whatever of your attention and your off focus and on focus
Right.
is to then have a more sophisticated usage of attention. Right. Let
Yes.
me give you an example. So one is, a very kludgy way of breaking on focus and off focus is just a block list. When you block someone on Twitter, you have a very blunt
Yeah.
instrument to push someone from on focus to off focus.
Right.
But when you have a nuanced conception or articulation of this, you then have a foundation for building tools to have a more sophisticated way to bridge between on focus and off focus. So you want a scalpel. So you don't block a person completely and move him completely from your on focus to off focus.
Right.
You pick tags or some ontology of what he's saying or
Yeah.
whatever. And so you have a much more granular, fine-grained, high-resolution way to talk about how his opinion or his mental model, which part of that you want to influence you. Right. And when you become a seasoned practitioner of attention, you will be able to act in this sophisticated way. And the hope is that that will, if not fix, at least slow down the boiling of the frog, because you now have a much more sophisticated way to pick and choose what you want to bring from your off focus to your on focus.
Right. Wait, so are you talking about making tools or are you talking about like people's
Possibly
perspectives? Yeah.
both, right?
Right.
Once you make it legible, you can have a
So
conversation about it and you can build the tools.
sufficient clarity about the thing will almost
Exactly.
inevitably lead to somebody building something. Or
Exactly.
it's they don't even yeah, you both get it. Okay. Makes sense. Yeah, I think right, so where I'm seeing
Maybe
go
one other thing to add is also, there's a lot of talk about meditation.
ahead.
And, again, I'm not super deep into meditation, so I might be getting it wrong, but it feels like the core part of meditation is controlling your focus. So being very cognizant of what you're focusing on,
Right.
bringing it back to some starting point when it starts to move off, right? And so, but meditation is about on focus, purely about on focus. It's about the path that you're on. Okay, I'm deviating somewhere else. I'm walking somewhere I shouldn't be, pulling you back. It feels like there's a sister part of meditation, and maybe this is somewhere else.
Yeah.
Again, it might be in my off focus,
Right.
which is about the off focus part of it.
Yeah.
About being internalizing or being aware in a kind of a background way that this thing I'm focusing on has a complementary negative space.
Right. I've actually heard some of, so I'm friends with some people on Twitter who are like serious meditation connoisseurs, and they will even the phrase they'll laugh at, but like they will say that there's something of that, like the no mind attention thing. Like there's I think the good news is there are a lot of people, and not enough, but there are a lot of people who grok several parts of this in different vocabulary or in different domains and whatever. Like I think serious practitioners probably in all domains have some sense of some version of this. And yeah, if we could present something that can be passed around.
Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if, again, serious practitioners have some understanding of this, because again, epistemology is a foundation for you for understanding everything. If you're a general in a war, you have to have good epistemology, because that is the framework for understanding the war. If you are fighting a pandemic, you have to have good epistemology, because that's the foundation for you understanding how pandemic spread, right? But the thing is, again, what we want is like a 101 course on this at the level of English and math or whatever. And actually, Daniel Kahneman tried to do this with, what was it, eighth graders, which is like in Singapore, like Sec 3 or Sec 2 students, right?
15-year-olds, yeah.
Yeah, and you want to add it to their curriculum, right? For various reasons, that didn't go anywhere. But again, right, this was decades ago when
Yeah.
the media environment wasn't when the frog was way less boiled.
10-year-olds are on TikTok now. Like the bottle is juice out of the
Exactly.
bottle. Yeah.
So, but I think they did some study where the point at which you can start having conversations about epistemology, this stuff, mental models, epistemology, things like that, is once they achieve a certain point, and it felt like that was 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds. But in any case, the thing is, it feels like that's just more urgent now. And this might not be school curriculum, given that, if you're saying 10-year-olds on TikTok, reaching them through school is maybe the wrong way. It's just that it needs a more concerted effort to have a baseline 101 level understanding of, again, your brain, how it works, your attention, how it works, and how we are in a media environment that degrades the way you evaluate media environments.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the media environment is degrading your foundation for evaluating this media environment that I'm in and how it's degrading me. Again, it's just like, the general in a war, he doesn't have to worry that the war is trying to degrade his epistemology. I mean, they will try by giving spies and stuff like that, but that's not the primary purpose of war. Or in a pandemic, the scientist or the researcher doesn't need to worry that the pandemic is trying to degrade his epistemology about the pandemic, right?
Right.
I have that foundation for knowledge making, and I use that foundation to figure out how to stop the pandemic.
Right.
But we are fighting. I mean, fighting again is too extreme. We are contending with an environment which itself is affecting our platform or foundation for evaluating that environment.
Right. Yeah. So so language is one of my domains, right? And I'm always thinking about how again, there's like this even before all before crypto and before any of those things, just I guess social media was the start of it, was an accelerator of it. But there's some version of this problem predated it, which is that people will use words creatively, right? And but then so like let's say you have some new word about thing, and this happens a lot in like the mental health domain where somebody comes up with a useful terminology like, I don't know, sociopath, let's say. It might have meant some very specific thing for a very specific medical context with a very clear meanings. And then people start using it casually outside that domain. And eventually it spreads a lot. It goes through like, there's like almost like a hype cycle of how much the word gets used. And eventually it gets used so much in so many domains and contexts that it no longer means anything. I think the word neurotic used to be like that. And then it no longer gets used anymore in a medical context because it applied to everything and therefore nothing. And why do I bring that up? It's because it feels like people so that used to be something that maybe linguists cared about, like, or like, historians cared about, but like it's increasingly every person needs to be sensitive to what they mean by what they say, what is meant by what someone else is saying, and the awareness that the language that you use might not, and even just the context clashing of like, so like in Singapore we use the word coolie for like there's no negative connotation to it. It's like, oh, our ancestors were coolies and that's fine. But like in other parts of the world where there are like migrant populations where like, let's say they're Chinese American migrants, coolie there is still like a slur. And so like a Singaporean might say it casually, and then the Chinese American might hear it and go, how dare you use that word? And then it's like, wait, what? Like, and if they don't realize that there's a mismatch in context, they might end up getting into like a very messy conflict. And yeah.
So those pairwise interactions explode on the internet. One, the distance between the kind of knowledge space is much wider, right? Because you can have, say, somebody from completely different cultures interacting with common words.
Right.
So one is the distance has shrunk and the number of pairwise interactions has exploded.
Right.
And so, it's easy to see how this environment is ripe for so many crazy things happening.
Mhm.
And again, the insane thing is that this environment degrades your platform for understanding the environment.
Right. It demands a level of, I mean, it demands surviving it requires a level of finesse that
Yeah.
civilians don't have. And I don't know if we can, so we like, do we expect them to have it? Or like, can we train them to have it in time before major conflicts? I'm guessing major conflicts are going to happen and we like,
I mean,
it's
major conflicts have
are
already
happening.
happened if you're if
Yeah.
you're if you're
But
following the news.
yeah, but like, somebody was saying, I tweeted something about 26, like 2016 to 2024, and people were like, oh, that those years felt like a century, someone was saying. And I'm like, it's easy for me to see in 2035, we're gonna look back on 2016 to 2024 as the good old easy days where, like it's
Mhm.
so yeah, so there is a sense of and now I'm reminded of some artists who are talking about the war in Vietnam, I think. Vonnegut and friends, they were trying to persuade people to be sensible or something, and it just like all of their concerted effort couldn't really move the needle on.
Mhm.
Well, it's that's debatable whether they moved the needle or not. I guess from their point of view, it's like too late, but better even too late is better than never, right? In terms of like a population coming to terms with. Well, so I guess in the US context, it's like coming to terms with, oh, you can't necessarily trust your government to like have I don't that's a huge can of worms. I don't even want to get into that. But that's the thing. It's gonna be everything is gonna be like that moving forward. And
Yeah, I think there'll be some natural immunity, just like how, our parents really don't deal well with
oh yeah,
WhatsApp messages that spread when you really shouldn't be listening to them. So we
yeah,
have that inoculation.
right.
So it feels like there'll be some natural inoculation that happens. It's just that you want to make sure that I don't know if you want to leave that to chance,
Yeah. So
because
people,
there
yeah,
might be
yeah.
a change in the quality of
Mhm.
this media shift.
Right. Well, I've definitely thought about this with regards to like, so like, I remember when I used to use Tumblr a lot, and people would discuss on Tumblr, like, okay, we have very young people who are pretending to be old enough. So like, click here if you're above 18, like they're 13-year-olds and stuff. And there's people who, like talking about sex, talking about, and so there's debates about like, what do we do? Like, should all of Tumblr try to police people's speech to protect the minors? And then some people are saying, well, minors have access to information that if they didn't have access to the information, they would get exploited. So there's a question of like how much do you expose, and I guess even more broadly, I think recently Tyler Cohen and Jonathan Haidt, I think, or someone else. Tyler Cohen was having a conversation with somebody about how much how much internet access do you give kids? Like, do you block them off entirely? Which is like a very practical question with epistemology concerns, and especially like their minds are still, growing. And I'm of the view that you can't block them from it. Like, so even if you superficially block them from it, like that may make it worse because they're gonna try. And so it's parallels with like drugs and whatever, right? They may find some other way to do it. So you want them to have access to like trusted peers and trusted adults, and some do, but some don't. And so, like, how do you? It's like, so you could talk about that for an hour, but like I think my short overview of the thing, like you're saying, you don't want to leave that to chance. So you want to stack the deck towards hygiene, right? Like, so there will always be some bad outcomes, but if we can do things to like, so I don't even think we can like prevent bad outcomes, right? Like the preventative measures can be worse than the thing, but to stack the deck, I think it's like you need like fast response times. You need people to be able to notice when something is going bad and flag it. And but yeah, thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is even before making it, even before that point, the precursor is really just making things legible, right?
Mm.
Having words and phrases for what is happening.
Right.
Like, I mean, I didn't listen to the Tyler Cohen piece
I just saw
that you talked
snippets.
about, but if in fact they did talk about it at the level of the internet,
Mhm.
it's clear that we don't have the nuanced terminology to discuss this, because that's like saying, should I allow my kid to use electricity or not? Right? I mean, that shouldn't be the resolution of discussion. Your discussion should be, okay, what appliance are they plugging in that you are allowing, right? And
Right.
in the same way, internet, saying should I put them on the internet or not is, it just feels like we don't have the legible platonic forms to have a productive discussion about this, because the internet is like electricity in this day and age, right? There are amazing things you can do with it. There are ways that you can blow off your face with it. There are ways that you can, so if we're still having the conversation at the level of the switching off or on the internet, then
Right.
it's clear that we don't have a nuanced enough legible understanding of the shape of this problem to even have the words to debate it. So even beyond trying to figure out, okay, how do we fix it or not, right? Or should we just let the natural inoculation happen? I think what is a much more safe and necessary step is to at least push the state of the conversation forward so that people at least have legible. I mean, we make the space more legible. We make it easier to articulate and have a nuanced conversation about this. It's very similar to, I think you've said before, that it's way more interesting to have a podcast where the podcaster builds on previous podcasts rather than start again from scratch and ask them all the starting questions again. So
Right.
that's what you want to do. You want to have you want to make the state of the art discussion about it public so that people can build on that to talk about attention and stuff like that, rather than talk about it on the level of should we switch on or switch off the internet. And we need to have a 101 baseline level of understanding of what's out there and at least what to call things, so that at the very least that will speed up inoculation by the next generation.
Right.
And
But
if we find that it's not happening, that is the foundation for building the tools or the ways to actually reverse it or fix it.
I think this is a great like it's we decided to have this conversation to try and figure out the space that we are both trying to get to, and this feels like an articulation that we could potentially reorient everything else around because it's a good problem statement, I think, right? So there's the state of conversation in the world right now about how some people are thinking about it is should we turn off the internet? Because and it's not that that's the actual problem, but like those are the tools, the clunky models that they have for dealing with the thing. And our task that seems I don't want to say achievable, but like feels manageable in some way. We've defined, it's worthy, and it feels like there are things we could try and adjust and crank and invite people to point at, and like we found what to point at, right? And the thing is that how do we make more legible the variables, the mechanisms that people are struggling with and are going to struggle with more and going to need help with? And so I guess just to recap, how would you describe that?
Yeah, actually, what I would say about that is we can now turn the beast on itself.
Yes.
So we have a media environment that degrades your epistemology by steering it in the wrong way. But it's just it's not a vector, it's just magnitude. So you can reorientate the media environment by hijacking attention in the same way that it's hijacked for malicious purposes. You can hijack it for benevolent purposes.
Right, like that's my whole social media
exactly
approach, right?
Exactly.
Like, so people say that, and so there's a general assumption that social media is generally bad for you because it's consumption and it raised to the bottom of the brainstem. But if you have people who are focused on the relationships that they want to have, so the connections, and they prioritize that, then what I think is quite gratifying is the first person to do it, they do have like a slightly superhuman burden. Like it's not natural to expect a common person to do it. But again, like we talked about elsewhere, like there are people who are outliers, and if we find those people and we get them in those positions, then they can. It's like the first person to climb, like when you have a rock climbing route on a cliff face or whatever, like there's all these things you can hook stuff on. But like the first person who went up there did not have those hooks. So how the hell did they do it? Like they were very advanced. But once you have someone who's like at least had some of the hooks, then the next person can follow, right?
Yeah, so that's what I mean by legible. So once you have mapped that path, you have a vocabulary for discussing how do I get up the mountain in the first place. Then you can build on that, or the rock wall. Then you can build on that to, okay, how do I take a better path? How do I improve the path?
Mhm.
But at the very least, everybody has a baseline understanding that, okay, you follow these footsteps or you
Right.
know, this path up the mountain,
Right.
and you're not always at the bottom thinking, how do I get up
Yeah.
quickly?
Yeah.
Right.
But
And
so
so
that
the point, yeah,
but I mean, so to turn it on itself, like uh rock walls are wonderfully concrete, right? They're wonderfully
sure,
fixed.
yes,
There is like
yes,
they are while they're physically daunting, intellectually it's like, oh yeah, there's a path up. Everyone can look at the path and oh, there's a path up. Yeah, sure. But so the challenge with epistemology is that people don't even agree on what the wall is, or right, or and like one person's path up might work for them, and then someone else it
yeah,
doesn't work for someone else.
sure. But again, we don't need
The
to go so far yet.
right,
We just
yeah.
need baseline legibility,
Yeah,
right? And so
something to disagree
this,
on even. Yeah.
yeah, no, but you see, the same media environment that that enables clickbait to spread at some wild
Right.
rate enables fan to spread at a
Right.
wild rate.
Correct. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the thing is, the nature of the thing can be subverted to spread baseline understanding of a thing. We don't need
Yeah.
to solve it yet. So all of these things are, again,
Yeah.
if we have epistemic hygiene, we
Right.
will realize
Correct.
that
Correct.
our
Yeah.
off focus about this
Yeah.
entire topic is massive.
Yeah. Correct.
So we just need to figure out what opinion should we whitelist?
Mm-hmm.
Having an opinion about changing the world's epistemology doesn't pass
Yeah.
through my whitelist.
Same.
The opinion that does pass through my whitelist is that we can make core concepts legible enough and use the media environment to spread them, that we start at least having the conversation, we upgrade the level of conversation. Obviously, you need to be a skilled practitioner of attention, right? I guess I'd say that you are much better at it than the average person.
Mm-hmm.
But as a skilled practitioner of attention, you can now use that as a carrier for different types of messages.
Right.
And you can use that as a carrier to build baseline understanding of how the media environment degrades epistemology. Does it make sense?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is just that you don't need to think of it at such a wide scale to begin with. All we need to think about is, right, how do we seed initial ideas and tune them so that they spread via the characteristics of the modern media environment?
Yeah. So I anticipate that the way to do that will like one vehicle that would probably be a good path to take is to really just go over the problems that we've seen people encounter, right? That we deal with, and
Look, I'll give you an example.
Mhm.
Your people-shaped, what do you say again?
Some
Make
essays.
it people-shaped,
Yeah.
right? Make messages people-shaped
Correct. Yeah.
is a very clear way that you are subverting the media environment to carry a message.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is you don't need to worry about fixing the world's epistemology. Just focus on using that carrier,
Right.
that tuning, right? That's a tuning of information. You're tuning the information to make it a much more efficient carrier of an explanation about the world, right? Or
Right.
an opinion that you have.
Correct.
So what I'm saying is that start very small and just have that and other things like that,
Mhm.
and spread certain messages that are needed to improve epistemology. Because like what I said, right? Okay, so it's like this. You're fighting a war where the purpose of the war is to degrade your epistemology.
Mhm.
But if you win that war, you can use the same kinetics of that war to improve your epistemology.
Correct. Yeah.
Because the nature of that war is that it can
Yeah.
impact epistemology. So you can
Yeah.
reverse is a strong word, but you can at least have different
Yeah.
sorties where
Yeah.
you are
Yeah.
doing the opposite of degrading epistemology.
Yeah, I mean, again, I remember so Orwell's this is a great essay, everyone should read it, Politics and the English Language. He talks about how, again, like just as drinking doesn't necessarily ruin your life, like a person like there's this negative side spiral that can go down and you can also reverse the cycle. So his perspective was that shoddy thinking leads to shoddy language, and then shoddy language leads to more shoddy thinking, and then spirals into
Exactly.
you can't think clearly, you can't speak
Yeah.
clearly, you can't think clearly.
Yes.
And the inverse is also true. So if you
There's a
take the
virtuous cycle.
trouble, if you take the
Exactly.
trouble to speak clearly and really mean what you say, then people can think more clearly from that stuff. And you can imagine a very well-written blog post would have well-written comments in the responses because the like what you were saying earlier about guiding people's thoughts in a way, right? Like influencing the attention that people follow. Um, well,
No, but you see the additional component there. So that is true,
mhm.
but there's an additional component there, which is that the nature of the medium is like, what is it, Brandolini's law, where to refute bullshit takes a
Order of magnitude
magnitude,
more. Yeah,
right? Okay, so that is the problem with modern media in a way, is
correct,
that the bullshitters have optimized carriers for their information,
correct.
right?
Yeah,
And so what you're trying to do is not only reverse the cycle to make it virtuous rather than vicious,
hmm
you also want to use the characteristics of the nature of the medium to have this equivalent bullshit. So you want to weaponize the same,
sure. Yeah,
characteristics of the medium that
right.
make bullshit spread
Yeah,
to spread your virtuous cycle. And only a skilled practitioner of the medium can do this.
that's true.
The non-skilled well-meaning non-skilled practitioners of the medium, and it's understandable why they're not skilled practitioners of the medium, because there's no reason why. I mean, it's very antithetical to how do I spread bullshit as a way to fix bullshit. It's a very strange conception.
Right,
So the people who don't want to spread bullshit generally just stay away from that thing completely and
right,
write
right, right,
dry
right. Yeah,
papers,
yeah,
which
yeah,
nobody reads,
yeah.
right? And so the thing is, you need a skilled practitioner, a
Mhm.
benevolent, skilled practitioner, to use the characteristic or the nature of the medium to reverse the damage, the degradation that the media does to epistemology. And the
Yeah,
nature of the medium is that it can impact epistemology. Right? The
yeah,
reason why it's dangerous is that it's a medium that can impact epistemology, and it degrades it. But it's a medium that can impact epistemology. This is like my tweet about there's the guy sitting in the bus or the train or whatever, and a tweet is an executable that can run in my brain.
right.
And then the happy guy is like, hey, wait a minute, the tweet is an executable that can run in my
Uh,
brain.
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
It's just magnitude. It's not a vector. You can point it where you want.
right. Yeah, so like I was telling somebody else as well, like everyone has this collective shared understanding, I think, that doom scrolling is bad for you, reading all the bad news and like even independent of epistemology, like just its effect on your mood can be so shitty. And it just like so you acknowledge that your mood is affected by what you read. So what if you chose to read things that you know
Mhm.
have a positive effect on you, which is um actually, even that's an interesting question to explore because like then you have like a almost like a Sankey diagram of like how many people acknowledge this, how many people having acknowledged
Mhm.
this still don't feel compelled to do it because and why not? Because some feel that it's not worth doing, or some feel that it's not going to be effective, or some there's like a whole like you can there's like a sales funnel, right? You can see all the people dropping
You
off at each step.
and the funny thing is that the only reason you're mentioning Sankey diagrams is because of Sankey diagrams you have probably been exposed to in the recent past. And that is the crazy thing about
Uh-huh.
attention and
Yeah,
how it impacts how you fill in gaps,
that's true. Yeah. Yeah. So
right? Yeah. Anyway, so the point is, if so, your question was, okay, so how do you practically deal with it? I just say, you can kind of use the medium against itself in a way,
mhm,
but again, it feels like step one is just making it legible to
right.
to, to make it to articulate things so that people know what we're up against and what are the characteristics of it, right? And
Mhm,
then you can kind of, the hope is that stuff follows from that,
yeah.
but at the very least, that serves as a foundation for other people to build on,
Mhm. Yeah, so
right?
I feel like this whole call has been useful, but like it's also kind of it feels like preamble. It feels like we
Mhm.
were setting up, establishing context and getting to the point of like, okay, so what exactly are we trying to do? And like like I there was it's funny, one of the most effective things I've done in recent times was actually just tell a story about something that happened between the two of us, which was like back when I was late
People
for work.
shaped, make it people shaped.
Yeah, so somebody was stressed about something, and it reminded me of that incident, and I just wrote up that story, and it's shared like 10,000 plus, like lots of people were reading it and affected by it. And I'm wondering what might be an equivalent people-shaped thing about, this sort of like epistemology, cleaning, hygiene thing. Like, do we have like if we have one between the two of us historically, that would save a lot of time. Like, and just write that and share it.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there is something. Let me see.
So I mean, even the attention sovereignty thread that I wrote, the allocate your attention like a VIP thing,
Mhm.
but it's harder to talk about because it's not so much like a discrete event where I did something and then you said something and then it's done. This was more like we had 5 years plus of conversations.
Yeah. But you know what I would do is okay, so here's the thing. The thing you want to make people shaped is not a conversation we had about epistemology.
Correct.
The thing you want to make
It's a
people
change
shaped
I made.
is the ability to make things people shaped. So what you should do is talk about a time where you share your understanding of making people shaped with someone that dramatically improve their writing. Because what that does is it makes people aware that, okay, people
Ah.
shaped is a thing and it's powerful. And wait a minute, is something people shaped being thrown at me?
This is so funny because this is actually what I've been trying to do with my subs. Like, I mean, with my essays that I've been stewing on ever since I shipped Introspect. I've been like figuring out what to write, and like I have a lot of drafts, but I haven't been satisfied with, about a bunch of them would be okay, but like, I'm trying to look for something more than okay that would achieve basically something like this, where the delivery of the thing
Yep,
is
I get what you're saying.
conveys the message
The thing.
more than the message.
Yeah, and I'm sure you have an example of that. I mean, I'd be very surprised if you don't have an example of that or can synthesize an example based on your real life experiences helping people with writing.
Yeah, some of my
I
tweets.
mean, look, you had a blog post that you wrote for us, which took, I mean, this is not a direct thing you can use, but you wrote a blog post about us for, when you were with us, where you took a Apple announcement
Mhm.
and you rejigged it to make it more effective. Do you remember
Uh,
this? I'll send you. I'll send you the link.
it's interesting.
Remember, and you made it shorter. You put in bullet points.
Oh yeah, I remember that. That was
Yeah,
fun. Yeah, yeah,
that is
yeah.
exactly, that's a very powerful because
You
you
can
are
see the
showing
difference. You
how
can
to,
feel the
yeah,
difference.
exactly.
Yeah.
But you are showing people how to write better by writing better.
Right. Yeah. So it's a show and tell kind of thing. Like, let me
Yes.
show you. Oh,
Yeah, but
I've
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. You're telling them about the thing you're telling them, right? Let me
Right.
tell you about the thing to give you the message of the thing. So giving people an example of you sharing a people-shaped example to someone else where it made them a better writer, both is people-shaped and convince and kind of makes. I mean, this is why people-shaped works, right? Because
Mm.
it makes the thing visceral and specific. And people shaped as a concept, especially the nuances of it, is absolutely related to what we're talking about in terms of attention, how it's hijacked, how you can use it for both good and bad purposes.
Mm. This is very interesting because I mean, it's a good day for me because I have multiple different things on my plate, and some of
Mhm.
them are actually the same thing, and it wasn't obvious in advance. But so this is one of those things. Yeah, like I can help with make a dent in this by also doing that. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, I guess like as we wrap up, I kind of wanna, which just goes back to the people shape thing again. Like I want to think out loud a little bit about unmuddling people,
Mhm.
and so there's the essays to write and stuff, but and we can get into more detail about that as well. But like what uh I guess now I'm feeling for what I think people are muddled about, and I'm scanning my own mind for the drafts, and yeah, I guess
Mhm.
I have been increasingly if I spend a lot of time in a place amongst a group of people or whatever, I eventually get frustrated because I start to perceive all of the like the bullshit basically, or like what people are saying but not doing. Like if you're just there once, you hear someone say something, you're like, oh, it sounds cool. Then you're there the next year and they're still saying that same thing. Like, okay, like there's some blockage somewhere that is not being addressed. And I must also feel it because it's also directed internally as well. Like, oh, I've been working on these essays for so
Ah,
long,
I
right? So
see. Hmm.
it's a mirror thing.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
my frustration does go down once I've shipped something. So it's internal frustration reflected outwards. But the slightly useful thing is that that frustration isn't completely fictitious. It like matches onto like real problems that people seem to have, right? Like and but yeah, so I guess my thing has been, why is it that I have been, and I mean when I articulate it out loud, I guess I know, but I'll just say it anyway. Like, why is it that I have been talking about focus on what you want to see more of, and direct your like do the things that you want to do, and this I've been communicating a lot of my ideas for a very long time and I'm talking about the specific group of people that I associate with, who I think I've done a pretty good job of like selecting from a wider crowd. Like, so I select more or less the best people I can find, and I present to them more or less the best things that I know for quite a long time. And despite all those things, I'm underwhelmed by the rate of adoption of
Ah.
um
Yeah. So what is the outcome you're trying to achieve? Is it to have a bigger audience, have a different type
no
of
no I
audience,
well
have what? How would
so
you describe that?
ideally, I just want to recruit like a super team of people with very, so in the language of what we're talking about now, like just people who have very good epistemics and who get shit done, right? Like in whatever, and it can I think I feel like I could use anyone. Like it could be a musician, it could be a filmmaker, it could be a programmer. Like this, I feel like if I could have a cluster of high functioning fans who know how to manage their attention, I could create a scene with those people. And that's like my skill set. So each of them might not be interested in doing the scene work, but I could create a scene that would then be inviting for, or I could not create, but like I could foster a scene that would then be inviting for more people to get in. And so one of my thesis is that, okay, tweets are just not good enough as in terms of like getting inside people's minds and really reshaping it. And essays I do think are a better format for that. And I feel like my Are You Serious essay slightly validated that thesis. Like people say things having read that essay that I'm like, I tweet about this all the time, but most people don't read so closely. I think even the smart, thoughtful people, like they're just busy, they're scrolling, like they don't stop to consider what we're saying. And like like even we have a mutual friend, like the young guy, like he read my book,
Mhm.
which has a lot of the ideas that we talk about, and we tweeted back and forth about it, um and still encounter the same issues that they were
Yeah.
dealing with before, which I
So
guess I also do. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, let me wait. So I had a question, which is you said that you want to gather a small team,
Hmm.
right? Okay. And then you said
Informally.
some, yeah, informally, sure. And you said something else about people reading it, but then not going into deep. Can
Right.
you just connect those two? I mean, those feel like two different things. So are those two different
Uh,
outcomes you're trying to get to, or
I
are
mean,
they related in some way?
no, so I guess I cast my style so far has been I cast a very broad net
Sure.
because I'm good
Hmm.
at casting a broad net. And there are people who present as potential collaborators who aren't actually good ones. And then there are people who don't think of themselves as potential good collaborators, but they might be. And so I have to like encourage them and like so it based on depending on their replies, right? So I cast a broad net. I look for people who resonate with what I'm saying. And so that part of the problem has been solved. Like I have a lot of people. But once I have all of those people, it's almost like okay, all the people who like your company's mission or like the mission, they
Hmm.
like the
Hmm.
ideas, but like can they execute? Like can they actually follow through and whatever is in their domain make their thing, right? And it's not like I need to hire them to come and work on my project
Yeah.
because the way that the seniors works is they each have to have their own independent projects connecting with their own parts of the world. And so I
Yeah.
want, yeah, so I would, so a thing that in the past I was stuck on was like, oh, I must be loyal to the people I've known for a long time. And now I'm like, well, it's like, it's more like a sports team thing where we can still be friends, but like if you're not attempting to grow, then I have limited capacity. And so for the seniors to like, Steve Jobs had the quote about how like if you have a group of A tier performers and you
Yep.
they become self-selecting about what they allow in. And I'm trying to assemble my version of that informally. And I do think I have some of the puzzle pieces, and I do think I have enough people who are close enough to being able to be that if I communicate it very clearly and with confidence, I could push them into it, or I could attract them into it. But like up until now, I've been hesitant partially, I think, because I myself am not so certain fully. So I've been playing it slow. Like I would rather take a bit longer and get it really right than like aggressively push for, hey, let's all organize this thing. And then if it doesn't work, it looks bad. And then that slows down the process. Yeah.
Okay, so what does success look like?
I would collect, so for me, I would be telling the stories of the people's accomplishments in whatever different fields. And also, I think people will be having very high quality conversations in public. And part of that would be, it would not just be based on like hypothesizing and theorizing. It would be people sharing experiences of what they've accomplished. And so, like, I feel like in the earliest days of Quora, like around 2012, 2013, there was some semblance of that where very interesting people who had done interesting work in the world, who had not thought of themselves as like media professionals, were answering questions with a lot of detail because they trusted that there were other smart, thoughtful people there, and it was like high trust. And for a brief window of time, that was like a shining era of Quora, and then it fell apart from block spam and all that stuff. So I kind of want to recreate that. I want to, and maybe I'm framing my problem too tightly. Like maybe I'm thinking too clearly about. Maybe I'm constraining it too much to these must be my personal friends. Not naturally, not it's not actually necessary. I could just strive to tell a bunch of stories about a bunch of people, and it's such that when people do good work, if someone else really appreciates it in detail publicly, like they would want to associate with them and like get like express gratitude or whatever. So that part is a bit flexible. I don't really care that. I mean, so my personal motivation is I would like to be in the presence of such an environment. So it's like I can envision a healthy environment that doesn't currently exist, or like a high functioning, flourishing environment that doesn't currently, or like partially exists right now. And I think if we manifest that environment, it becomes very easy to like welcome outliers into, give them the support structure that they need, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, let me throw a few thoughts at you. I
Yes,
mean,
please.
again, so this is just a kind of
Spitballing.
raw thoughts, and then
Yeah.
yeah, spitballing, and then you can kind of process it.
Mhm.
So the thing I'd start with is, just before we start, I have a feeling for Quora. The reason why it was the way you described is because of the founding, and
Yeah, correct.
I might be
That's true.
completely wrong with this, but the founding state of Quora, which is that
Mhm.
a few investors
Yeah,
seeded it. It
correct.
was seeded with a set of people.
Yeah.
And in that case, it's not, I mean, it's easy to see why practitioners would
Mhm.
also want to be involved, because there's social signaling and
Correct.
social value in that. Okay, so that's one part of it.
Mhm.
The other thing, okay, so what I would say is this. Okay, so let me step back for a bit. So one thing, and we might have talked about this before, and we kind of have a bit of language to talk about it now, but so headsets, I think you've seen me talk about headsets, and headsets are just a short form for talking about system one versus system two. It's your brain. Your headset is about, it's just two different parts of your brain that interact to get you what you want. Okay. And we just talked about, earlier in the call, that writing is a very on focus activity.
Correct.
And actually what it is a very headset centric activity.
Mhm.
Okay. So, I mean, so writing in its common form, which is writing well, making something spread, a lot of reply game. Reply game is a headset centric activity.
Mhm.
It has a social component, which is absolutely system one. It's got a language component, which is absolutely system one. So there are many system one components in it. So being really good at reply game, if you are bad at if you don't have a sophisticated understanding of headsets, you are going to be bad at reply game. This is probably why people are bad at reply game, because they're very system two. They
Right.
don't understand that there's a system one. You know, you know, two brains have to talk with two headsets in between them. And if the brain doesn't understand that, or doesn't understand how to navigate a brain to headset to brain pathway, it is going to suck at reply game. Because a reply game is really about the headset to headset component. Does it make sense? Okay, I'll leave you with that.
Okay.
The brain directs it, obviously, but, and again, right, the analogy breaks down because both of these things are in your actual brain, right? But
Right.
both system 1 and system 2 are in your actual brain, right? So when I say it's brain to headset to brain, it's actually brain to brain, but it's just that it needs to go through your system 1.
It could be a prefrontal.
And so,
limbic,
yeah, you're exactly. Okay. But so if you don't have an understanding of the system 1 components or the headset components, you're going to be bad at reply game. And this is very likely why people are bad at reply game. It can be trained, obviously, but this is why, so there's a particular inclination. Okay. So one thing to note is that, there's the midwit there's the midwit meme, right? I think you know what I'm talking about. So at the what are the 3 things? So there's midwit, is that a name for that?
Let's say Lobby and High-B.
Okay. The Lobby is like, hey, it's all about the headset gratification, right? The midwit is the brain rules the headset.
Oh, okay, yeah, I can see it.
The High-B is the brain rules the headset for the headset. So the headset is the highest order bit, the brain, which controls the headset. So everything we're doing is for the headset.
Right.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I'm translating it in my mind to be like stuff people say, like follow your heart, and then follow your impose your thinking on the thing, and it's like, actually it's your heart informing your mind, informing your emotions and logic ish. It's not the same thing, but
but you do everything for emotions effectively.
in the end,
ultimately you have to understand that. So why you might be bad at reply game is because you are at the midwit part where you think that the brain should rule the headset. So why should I care about my headset? But you have to understand that your brain is a slave to the headset to begin with, right? I mean, your brain is a slave to the emotions, which is headset thing. Anyway, okay, so that's just some preamble. So what I would say is your class of activity and your domain, I think we've talked about this before, is a headset-centric domain. What you are asking for sounds like, and you should kind of validate this or correct this, is that you are looking for brain-centric participants to mix in. A practitioner, right, in the form, people can get stuff done. That's a very brain-centric activity. A lot of those people are bad at reply game.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I think, actually that would be, if you ask me, like, what is the central tension of the friendly ambitious nerd thing, it's that, again, like those 3 things are not naturally co-forming, right? You have to smush them together. And it's very clear that the most powerful ambitious nerds are not very good at interfacing with people. In fact, it's almost directly, right? And
but you can fix that problem. But let me just put this out there. So the thing is, right, what you're doing is you are excelling in a domain. Oh no, it's not that. Your approach in what you're trying to do is a very headset-centric approach, which is understandable. Your domain is very headset primary. Okay, but having said that, so what you are doing is you are getting better at appealing to headsets. You're teaching people to get better at appealing to headsets. So your topics are very headset specific or headset centric. But you now want to, so that's the core part of your audience. People who respond well to words, even if they aren't good with words, they respond well to words, right?
True. Yeah.
And so what happens is, and that segment is important because that is the segment that you rouse and can build a coalition around and can spread the message. All those are very headset-centric activities.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have built up a very sophisticated or you have a very nuanced headset operation. Headset-centric operation. Now, the tricky thing though is if you want to expand the segment to more brain-centric, system 2-centric folks, you need to understand that they are not headset-centric. I mean, for obvious reasons. And so you need to figure out, because you're the headset guy, how do I appeal to the headset? The way to appeal to a brain-centric person's headset is not by headset-centric activities.
Sure. Yeah.
Does it make sense?
Yeah.
And so what you want to do is figure out how do I, because the thing is the end state is the same or correct, right? It's just, what you just said, do you say to people to collaborate, or this, you're using some terminology about getting people together to achieve something, and that requires definitely headset-centric components and brain-centric components, right? System 1 centric stuff and system 2 centric stuff.
Right.
Both as first-class citizens.
Yeah.
So the thing is, you have gotten very good at the headset being the first-class citizen. So the question is, how do you get good at the brain being also the first-class citizen, so that when you communicate that, you appeal to the headsets of brain-centric folks? And they don't dismiss, and I don't know if they dismiss, but you don't have the risk that they're dismissing your communication as headset-centric and appealing and only applicable and relevant if you are headset-centric to begin with. Because they aren't. They know that for me to fix the vaccine, to develop vaccine, I need to effectively ignore the headset-centric communication, because that degrades my epistemology potentially. So if you approach them with any kind of headset-centric communication, they automatically are going to feel that, hey, wait a minute, they're not going to take to it as naturally.
Yeah.
And so, let me just throw this out. An example, and you can validate this. An example of what I mean is that if, for example, you found either by your, okay, look, so here's the thing. The brain-centric thing about what you're doing is to get headsets to join together to achieve real-world outcomes.
Right.
Okay. How do you prove that to a brain-centric person who disregards or at least deprioritizes headset-centric comms? It is by showing him that I have achieved some real-world outcome by getting headsets to work together. Find a project manager via headset-centric comms who complements the things you're bad at, say scheduling or whatever. I mean, I don't know if that's still a thing, but who complements that, and the two of you get together to achieve a real-world outcome. And this shouldn't be of the form where, you had the tweet about somebody read the book and then they felt really good, but then 3 months later they were still muddled, right? Yeah, this cannot be of that form, because that shows that something happened in the headset which didn't happen in system 2. And so if a system 2 reads that, they're going to disregard it because they think the primacy of system 2.
Fair. Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if anything, I would say that is one path you can explore.
Interesting. It's funny. This is like super opposite of abstractions or whatever, but like I don't know if I spoke about working out while we were working together with your colleagues, but like ever since my son was born, I've been working out better. Like, I mean, I am in physically better shape than I've ever been maybe in my life. And that has been, it's interesting because you can't that's not really a matter of, so I don't know if I would say that's not a headset thing, right? Like it's
no, you see, that's headset centric with a brain outcome. That has a real world outcome. So that is the kind of thing that's attractive to brain centric folks. Do you get what I'm saying? And you kind of did it by hacking your own headset, I imagine.
Somewhat, yeah.
So if you can achieve the equivalent of building muscles by connecting headsets together, that is what you're looking for.
Yeah, I have a bunch of like anecdotes of, one is people doing meetups, people get like, forming
co-founders. But you see, meetups are headset centric activities.
Yeah. And but then the things that what about the things that they subsequently accomplish with the people that they meet?
Okay, so make that very
more legible. Yeah. So
but you see, okay, so real world outcome is not precise enough to be useful for this conversation. What I mean by real world outcome can be two people meet together and make both each other happy. Okay, therapy, okay, so the lines blur and the analogy breaks down at some point, but
Right.
there is some class of activity where real world things happen in the world, but the final outcome is something that happens in your brain. There are other real world things that happen where the final outcome doesn't happen in the brain, i.e., a vaccine being created is a
Right.
vaccine being created outside of any brain.
Right.
But two people meeting up and both considering that meeting a success only
Right.
happens in their brain. So that's what I
Yeah.
mean by headset-centric outcomes.
Yeah.
So actually, maybe the way I phrased it is wrong. It's not so much real world.
It's
It
output.
terminates at a headset or it terminates in the real world.
Right. Yeah. Now I'm reminded of there was a quote from one of the comedians in class getting coffee interviews where someone said about, I'm not sure it's about Hollywood or about show business somewhere, and like so there is this whole complex of, so you have all the different agents and all the producers and all of those things, right? And there is this thing that happens where people show up to have meetings where they listen to proposals of potential shows and like who wants to produce what episode ideas do you have, and there is the experience of a good meeting, which may or may not lead to shows, and sometimes they
Mhm,
do, but like
mhm,
then there
mhm.
is the meetings that lead to good shows, which may not be
Yeah,
pleasant meetings at all, right? And then
yeah.
there is one of the comedians was describing how there is a phenomenon of optimizing for good meetings based on the
Yes.
producers
It's
and
this
their
exactly it.
assistants and the thing,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
good meetings are
No,
pleasurable, right?
but you see, to run the meeting that leads to the show well requires understanding headsets.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
not to run a good meeting. That
Right.
is also a headset-centric thing.
Right.
That's exactly an
Right.
example of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There are two of these headset-centric activities,
Right.
one that leads to a show being done and one that doesn't.
Right.
But the thing that there are also meetings where it's not a pleasant meeting and there's
Yeah.
no show
It's
that, right?
probably the most common kind of meeting. Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly it. That's the most common kind of meeting. So first you want to cut that out,
Yeah.
but then you don't want to then be satisfied with the pleasant show that doesn't result in shows.
Mhm.
Because, okay, you have a pleasant meeting at least, which is better
Right.
than the 90% of meetings that are crappy
Yeah.
and don't
Yeah.
lead to everything.
Mhm.
And you draw an audience of pleasant meeting,
Right.
people who are interested in how do you do pleasant meetings, which has tremendous value. I mean, pleasant, again, is not precise enough to be useful,
Yeah.
but the meetings that result in shows are pleasant in some form.
Especially in retrospect. 'Cause, I mean, so the funny thing is,
Sure, sure, sure. Yeah.
there's some meetings where they're yelling at each other, right? But then the show
Yeah,
happens and it's
exactly.
good.
And you need to know the differences.
Correct. Yeah.
Those are all
Productive.
headset-centric activities.
Right.
Understanding the difference between a yelling meeting that doesn't have a show, a yelling
Right.
meeting that does have a show, and a
Right.
happy meeting that doesn't have a show,
Right.
all have to do with headset. Navigating that is a headset-centric
Correct.
activity.
Correct.
Somebody
Yeah.
who doesn't have a nuanced understanding of headset isn't going to do
Right.
that. But if you want to get the full audience that you want, you have to make sure it results in a show.
Correct. Yeah. And part of the tragedy is that there is so in the fan framework, whatever, there's an ambitious nerd archetype that disregards the idea of running meetings properly, or just not caring about how meetings go, basically. And
Mhm. Yeah,
and it's unfortunate because they leave their, so like in the equivalent is, let's say they're making shows out, they're trying to fundraise or whatever
sure.
it is, and in an ideal world for them, they wouldn't have to care about how meetings go, and they can
Yeah.
just say their shit however they say it, and then be judged on the merit of their ideas, and then it goes through. I mean, you get this. I don't
So
actually need to explain this to you,
fan
but
fan is a triangle. You
Mhm.
want a pyramid where
Mhm.
the apex is the outcome.
Yeah. Oh, that's a nice way of putting it. Yeah. So what I'm getting out of this is, I do know that I have influenced outcomes quite directly sometimes, but I have been hesitant to
No, but
make that very visible. And what I'm getting out of this, I should be more aggressive about asking
no, but
people about.
again, outcome needs to be, you need to be specific about
Yeah.
what kind of outcome. It's a outcome that doesn't terminate in a brain. It
Yeah. Yeah.
terminates in a show,
People making
right?
stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Output.
Sure, but I mean, okay, there's a lot of nuance here, but
Mhm.
I think this is at least the starting point.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to tell you is that there's some subset of outcomes that if you make legible,
Mhm.
you will broaden your audience. if you make the pyramid, if you accentuate the pyramid, and you have to be, there's value in being more specific about what the outcome apex is. But if you get that outcome apex, right, and we can talk more about that, right, and get more precise about it. But once you get that outcome apex, your pyramid is going to attract a set of people that your triangle cannot.
Yeah, I even have tweets about this, about like
I'm sure you do, because this is
Sure.
ahead. You
Right,
you
right.
have to understand that. You have
Yeah,
to already understand this,
yeah. But
because
so,
this is an
mhm.
absolutely a headset kind of,
Yeah,
you know.
I'm just reflecting on how so like I do find that the meeting slash show metaphor very rich for me, because I definitely have had opportunities I've witnessed circumstances where I could have pushed for some equivalent of a show and didn't,
Why?
because just any attempt at anything involves
Ah,
some measure of risk.
you see, but this is the thing.
Yeah,
The brain people know this. And
right,
if you are not doing things that risk failure,
right.
they are going to disregard what you're saying.
Yeah, true. I
This
see
is
it.
exactly what I'm saying. If
Yeah.
you aren't pyramid centric yourself,
Hmm.
you don't understand the nuances of the apex and how to communicate that to an
Yeah.
audience who understands why that is necessary. So,
Ah,
introspecting about why you yourself did not articulate the outcome
yeah.
is incredibly important.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah, it's it's so meta, but yeah, I have to. Yeah, again, it's just a matter of shifting. I mean, I think I justified it internally that you should defer a little bit, somewhat, to increase your
You know the
confidence.
answer to everything you're saying. You already know.
Yeah,
You have
we've
no
had this.
questions here.
Yeah,
Yeah, we've had
yeah,
this
I know.
conversation before.
Yeah,
You know the answers to any question you're going to ask me now. You know
correct,
it.
correct. Yeah, I just have to do the thing. Okay. That's
And
a
the beautiful thing about this is when you change from triangle to pyramid, you are in the same way that attention shapes your world.
Mhm.
Once you are now paying attention to the apex or the
Right,
outcome,
right.
your communication is going to change,
You can
your
focus on what you
audience
want.
is going to change,
You see
your
more of what you.
everything is going to change.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. It's just outcome centric thinking, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's about time anyway. So,
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, it's good. All right.
in both senses. All right. Thanks, Dinesh,
Okay,
for
all right,
this.
sounds
I'll
good.
end the call here.
Sounds
I'll
good.
get back to you when I have stuff to
Sounds
ask you
good.
about.
All right.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. Take care. Bye bye.
See ya.